Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other recruits at Fort Benning. At barely 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing just over 100 pounds, she looked more like someone who belonged in a library than on a military training ground. Her soft voice and gentle demeanor made her seem out of place among the tough, battle-hardened soldiers who filled the ranks of the elite sniper training program. The morning of sniper qualification dawned cold and gray, with a thick mist hanging over the Georgia hills. Sarah arrived at the range early, as she always did, carrying her rifle case with careful precision. She had spent months preparing for this moment, studying wind patterns, calculating distances, and practicing her breathing techniques until they became second nature, but none of that seemed to matter to her fellow trainees. "Look who's here early," called out Jake Thompson, a massive former football player from Texas, who had been the loudest critic of Sarah's presence in the program. "Little Sarah thinks she's going to be the next Annie Oakley." His comment drew snickers from the group of male soldiers gathered around the equipment shed. Marcus Rodriguez, another trainee who had served 2 tours overseas before joining the sniper program, shook his head dismissively. "I still don't understand why they let women into this program. This isn't some video game where size doesn't matter. When you're crawling through mud for hours with a 50-pound pack, you need real strength." Sarah kept her head down and continued preparing her equipment. She had heard variations of these comments for months now. Some questioned her physical capabilities, others doubted her mental toughness, and a few openly stated that having a woman in their unit would be a liability in combat situations. The constant negativity had worn her down, but she refused to quit. Sergeant First Class Williams, their primary instructor, emerged from the range office with a clipboard in hand. A veteran of 3 combat deployments, Williams had initially been skeptical about having a female trainee in his program. However, he had watched Sarah's progress with growing interest over the past several weeks. "Listen up, maggots," Williams barked in his characteristic gravelly voice. "Today's qualification will determine who moves forward in this program and who gets sent back to regular infantry. You'll have 3 phases: precision shooting at known distances, unknown distance targets, and moving targets. Each phase eliminates the bottom performers until only the top candidates remain. The first phase began with shots at targets placed at distances of 300, 500, and 800 meters. Sarah settled into her shooting position, adjusting her scope and checking wind conditions. She had always been naturally steady, a trait that served her well in precision shooting. As she squeezed the trigger for her first shot, she felt the familiar calm that came over her when she was focused on her target. Her shot hit dead center, earning a nod of approval from the range safety officer. The second and third shots followed with similar precision. Around her, she could hear the other shooters firing, some cursing under their breath when their shots went wide. Jake Thompson, despite his earlier bravado, struggled with the longer distances, his shots consistently pulling to the right. "Not bad for a girl," muttered one of the other trainees as they moved to the second phase. Sarah ignored the backhanded compliment and focused on the next challenge. The unknown distance phase required shooters to estimate ranges to targets placed at varying distances across the range. This was where experience and instinct played crucial roles. Sarah studied each target carefully, noting environmental factors that might affect her calculations. She had spent countless hours studying ballistics and had developed an almost intuitive understanding of how bullets traveled through different conditions. As the phase progressed, more shooters were eliminated. The initial group of 20 had been reduced to 12. Sarah noticed that several of the men who had been most vocal about her presence were among those sent home. Jake Thompson barely made the cut, scraping by with the minimum qualifying score. The final phase involved engaging moving targets at various distances. This was considered the most challenging part of the qualification, requiring shooters to lead their targets while accounting for wind and other environmental factors. Sarah watched as the mechanical targets began their programmed movements across the range. She took her time with each shot, calculating lead times and adjusting for the target's speed and direction. Her first shot missed narrowly, the bullet passing just behind a target moving from left to right. She adjusted her lead and fired again, this time connecting solidly. The satisfaction of a successful hit gave her confidence for the remaining targets. As the qualification continued, Sarah found herself in an unexpected position. She was not only keeping pace with the other remaining candidates, but actually performing better than most. Her natural steadiness, combined with her meticulous preparation and study, was paying dividends. The quiet girl who had been dismissed and ridiculed was proving herself to be one of the top performers in the group. The final tally was announced as the sun began to set over the range. Of the original 20 candidates, only 8 had qualified to continue in the program. Sarah's name was called third, ahead of several supposedly superior male candidates. The score sheet showed that she had outperformed Jake Thompson by a significant margin and had come within 2 points of the highest score of the day. As the successful candidates gathered their equipment, the atmosphere was subdued. The easy jokes and casual dismissals had stopped. Sarah could see uncertainty in the eyes of men who had been so confident in their assumptions about her capabilities. Some looked embarrassed, others appeared thoughtful, and a few seemed genuinely surprised by the results. Williams approached Sarah as she was cleaning her rifle. "Good shooting today, Martinez," he said simply. "You've earned your spot here." His words carried weight coming from someone who had initially questioned whether women belonged in the program. That evening, Sarah called her parents to share the news of her qualification. Her father, a retired police officer who had taught her to shoot as a child, expressed his pride. Her mother, while supportive, worried about the dangers her daughter might face in her chosen career path. Sarah assured them both that she was prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. As she settled into her bunk that night, Sarah reflected on the day's events. The qualification had been just one hurdle in a long journey, but it represented something important. She had proven to herself and others that dedication and skill mattered more than preconceived notions about who belonged in elite military units. The laughter and dismissive comments from that morning seemed like they had happened weeks ago, rather than hours ago. Little did Sarah know that the real test of her abilities would come sooner than anyone expected, and in circumstances far more serious than a training exercise. 3 weeks after the qualification, Sarah found herself deployed to a remote outpost in eastern Afghanistan. The transition from the controlled environment of Fort Benning to the harsh reality of a combat zone was jarring. The outpost, designated Forward Operating Base Granite, sat precariously on a rocky hillside, overlooking a strategic valley that served as a major supply route for both coalition forces and insurgent groups. The base housed approximately 200 soldiers from various units, including Sarah's newly formed sniper team. The living conditions were Spartan at best, with soldiers sleeping in reinforced concrete bunkers and eating meals from packages that had been shipped halfway around the world. The constant threat of enemy fire meant that everyone moved with purpose and stayed alert at all times. Sarah's team consisted of 4 snipers and their spotters, led by Staff Sergeant Mike Chen, a veteran of multiple deployments who had initially been skeptical about having a female team member. Chen was a professional soldier who judged people based on their performance rather than their appearance. But he was also aware of the unique challenges that Sarah might face in this environment. "Martinez, you'll be paired with Corporal Davis as your spotter," Chen announced during their first team meeting at the base. "Davis has been here for 6 months and knows the area better than anyone. Listen to him, learn from him, and follow his lead when it comes to understanding local conditions." Tommy Davis was a lanky kid from Ohio who had developed an encyclopedic knowledge of the terrain around FOB Granite. He had the kind of sharp eyes and attention to detail that made him an excellent spotter, and he had quickly earned the respect of his peers through his competence and reliability. Unlike some of the soldiers Sarah had encountered, Davis seemed genuinely unconcerned about working with a female partner. The first few days at the outpost were spent getting acclimated to the environment and establishing shooting positions around the perimeter. Sarah learned to identify potential threats in the complex terrain below, where ancient irrigation ditches, mud brick compounds, and rocky outcroppings provided countless hiding places for enemy fighters. The weather was brutal, with daytime temperatures soaring above 100 degrees and nights that could drop into the 40s. The altitude made physical exertion more difficult, and the dry air caused constant dehydration, despite drinking water almost continuously. Sarah adapted to these conditions with the same methodical approach she had used during training, carefully monitoring her body's responses and adjusting her routines accordingly. On her 4th day at the base, Sarah experienced her first real engagement. She and Davis were positioned in an observation post, overlooking the main road when they spotted a group of men placing what appeared to be an improvised explosive device along the route that a supply convoy would use later that morning. "I've got 5 military-age males," Approximately 800 meters southeast of Checkpoint 3, Davis reported through his radio. They appear to be emplacing an IED. Sarah adjusted her scope and confirmed the sighting. Through her powerful optics, she could clearly see the men working to conceal an explosive device beneath the road surface. The lead figure appeared to be directing the others, pointing to specific locations and checking their work with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. Command. This is Overwatch 2. Chen's voice crackled through their radio. We have visual confirmation of hostile activity. Request permission to engage. The response came quickly. Overwatch 2, you are cleared to engage. Neutralize the threat. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she prepared for her first combat shot. All the training in the world could not fully prepare someone for the moment when they had to take a human life, even when that life belonged to someone actively working to harm American soldiers. She controlled her breathing, checked her wind reading, and calculated the range one final time. Wind is 3 miles per hour from the west, Davis reported quietly. Range is 790 meters. Target is stationary. Sarah made the necessary adjustments to her scope and settled into her shooting position. The leader of the group had stood up and was surveying their work, presenting a clear target silhouette. She placed her crosshairs on center mass, took a deep breath, let half of it out, and gently squeezed the trigger. The shot broke cleanly, and through her scope, Sarah watched the target fall. The other men scattered immediately, some running toward nearby buildings while others dove for cover behind rocks and vehicles. The IED installation had been stopped, but the engagement was far from over. Good shot, Davis said simply. You've got another target moving toward that blue truck about 50 meters north of your last hit. Sarah quickly acquired the new target and fired again. This shot also found its mark, dropping the insurgent before he could reach cover. The remaining men had disappeared into the maze of buildings and irrigation ditches that characterized the local landscape. Overwatch 2, good shooting, came the voice of the base commander over the radio. That convoy will be able to pass safely thanks to your intervention. Well done. As Sarah and Davis packed up their equipment and prepared to move to a new position, she reflected on what had just happened. She had successfully completed her first combat engagement, preventing potential casualties among American forces. The training that had prepared her for this moment had proven its worth, but the reality of taking human life, even in combat, would require time to process fully. Word of the successful engagement spread quickly around the base. Sarah noticed that some of the soldiers who had previously viewed her with skepticism or curiosity now looked at her with a different kind of respect. She had proven herself in combat, which was the ultimate test in their community. That evening, Chen approached Sarah as she was cleaning her rifle. Good work today, Martinez, he said. You performed exactly as trained and helped save American lives. That's what we're here for. Jake Thompson, who had somehow ended up at the same base despite his poor performance during qualification, overheard the conversation. He had been assigned to a regular infantry unit rather than the sniper team, a fact that clearly bothered him. Lucky shot, he muttered as he walked past. Davis, who had been sitting nearby, stood up and faced Thompson. Luck doesn't put 2 shots on target at 800 meters in combat conditions, he said firmly. That was skilled training and cool thinking under pressure. Maybe you should worry about developing those qualities instead of making excuses. Thompson walked away without responding, but Sarah could see that the dynamic at the base was beginning to shift. Her competence in combat had started to override the prejudices and assumptions that some soldiers held about women in combat roles. However, she also understood that one successful engagement would not be enough to change everyone's mind. Over the following weeks, Sarah participated in several more operations, each one building her confidence and reputation. She learned to read the local terrain like a book, identifying potential threats and safe movement routes with increasing accuracy. Her partnership with Davis developed into an efficient and effective team, with both soldiers learning to anticipate each other's needs and communications. The harsh environment and constant danger created bonds between soldiers that transcended traditional social barriers. Sarah found herself accepted as a valued team member by most of her colleagues, though a few holdouts continued to question her presence in the unit. 2 months into her deployment, Sarah had established herself as one of the most reliable snipers at FOB Granite. She had successfully completed over a dozen engagements, protecting convoys, eliminating high-value targets and providing overwatch for patrol operations. Her partnership with Davis had become legendary among the base personnel, with their communication so seamless that they seemed to read each other's minds during operations. The intelligence reports coming into the base had been increasingly concerning. Enemy activity in the region was escalating, with larger groups of fighters moving through the area and more sophisticated weapons appearing in their arsenal. The local insurgent commander, known only as the Wolf, had been organizing coordinated attacks against coalition forces throughout the province. Sarah's reputation had even reached the ears of the base intelligence officer, Captain Rebecca Foster, who had specifically requested her for a high-priority surveillance mission. The mission involved monitoring a suspected meeting location where the Wolf was believed to be planning a major operation against coalition forces. "Martinez, I need your eyes on a compound about 12 kilometers northeast of here," Captain Foster explained during the mission briefing. "Intelligence suggests that the Wolf will be meeting with several cell leaders tomorrow night to coordinate a large-scale attack. We need positive identification and detailed intelligence about their numbers, weapons, and planned activities." The compound in question was located in particularly challenging terrain, requiring Sarah and Davis to infiltrate through enemy-controlled territory and establish a concealed observation post within effective range. The mission would require them to remain in position for potentially several days, gathering intelligence while avoiding detection by hostile forces. Sarah spent the evening before the mission studying satellite images and topographical maps of the target area. She identified several potential observation positions and planned multiple escape routes in case their position was compromised. Davis worked on preparing their equipment, ensuring they had sufficient water, food, and ammunition for an extended operation. They departed the base before dawn, moving on foot through terrain that seemed designed to challenge every aspect of their training. Rocky outcroppings provided good concealment but made movement slow and difficult. The constant threat of mines and improvised explosive devices meant that every step had to be carefully considered. After 6 hours of careful movement, they reached their planned observation position, a rocky outcropping that provided excellent visibility of the target compound while offering good concealment from enemy observation. Sarah set up her rifle while Davis established their spotting position and communication equipment. The compound below was a typical Afghan residential structure, surrounded by high mud brick walls with several buildings arranged around a central courtyard. During the day, it appeared to be occupied by a normal family going about their daily activities. Children played in the courtyard, while women worked in a vegetable garden and men tended to livestock in adjacent fields. As evening approached, the character of the compound began to change. The family members disappeared into the buildings and armed men began arriving in small groups. Sarah counted at least 15 fighters, all carrying automatic weapons and dressed in the typical clothing of local insurgents. "We've got confirmation of hostile activity," Davis reported quietly into his radio. Multiple armed individuals converging on the target location. Through her scope, Sarah could see that these were not ordinary fighters. Their equipment was newer and better maintained than typical insurgent gear, and their movements displayed a level of discipline and organization that suggested professional military training. These were elite fighters, the kind who formed the backbone of the Wolf's organization. As darkness fell, more vehicles arrived at the compound. Sarah and Davis took turns monitoring the activity while the other rested, maintaining constant surveillance as instructed. The intelligence they were gathering was clearly valuable, as the number and quality of personnel at the meeting far exceeded initial estimates. Around midnight, a black SUV arrived at the compound, and Sarah immediately knew this was significant. The vehicle was much newer and more expensive than the typical transportation used by local insurgents. Through her night vision scope, she watched as several men emerged from the vehicle, including one who matched the physical description of the Wolf. "Davis, I think we have our primary target," Sarah whispered. "Black SUV, 3 occupants, one matching the description of our high-value target." Davis confirmed the sighting and began photographing the individuals with a high-powered camera equipped with night vision capabilities. The intelligence value of these photographs would be enormous, potentially allowing coalition forces to identify and track key leadership figures in the insurgent network. The meeting inside the compound continued for several hours, with various individuals coming and going from the main building. Sarah and Davis documented everything they observed, building a comprehensive picture of the insurgent organization's structure and activities. As dawn approached, the meeting began to break up. The various groups of fighters departed in different directions, some on foot and others in vehicles. Sarah tracked several of these departures through her scope, noting routes and destinations that could be valuable for future operations. The black SUV was among the last to leave, with the wolf and his associates departing just as the sun began to rise over the mountains. Sarah had a clear shot at the vehicle as it navigated the rough road leading away from the compound, but her orders were strictly for surveillance and intelligence gathering rather than engagement. "Command, this is Overwatch 7, Davis reported as they prepared to leave their position. "Mission accomplished. We have positive identification of the primary target and comprehensive intelligence on the meeting participants and activities." The return journey to FOB Granite was even more challenging than their infiltration, as they had to avoid several groups of insurgent fighters who were now actively patrolling the area. Sarah and Davis used all their skills in camouflage and concealment to remain undetected while covering the 12 kilometers back to base. When they finally reached the safety of FOB Granite, they were immediately debriefed by Captain Foster and the base intelligence team. The information they had gathered was considered so valuable that it was immediately transmitted to higher headquarters for analysis and action planning. "Outstanding work," Captain Foster told them after the debriefing. "The intelligence you gathered will be instrumental in planning future operations against this network. You've both demonstrated exceptional professionalism and skill under extremely challenging conditions." Word of their successful mission spread quickly throughout the base. Sarah found that even the soldiers who had previously been skeptical of her abilities now treated her with genuine respect and admiration. She had proven herself not only as a skilled sniper, but also as a reliable and competent soldier capable of handling the most demanding missions. Jake Thompson, who had been assigned to guard duty that morning, approached Sarah as she was heading to the mess hall. For once, his usual hostile attitude seemed to have been replaced by something resembling grudging respect. "I heard about your mission," he said quietly. "Command is saying it was one of the most successful intelligence operations they've conducted in this sector." He paused for a moment, seeming to struggle with his words. "I guess I was wrong about some things." Sarah simply nodded and continued toward the mess hall, too tired from the mission to engage in extended conversation. However, she recognized that Thompson's admission represented a significant shift in attitudes among at least some of the soldiers who had questioned her place in the unit. That evening, as Sarah cleaned her equipment and prepared for the next day's operations, she reflected on how far she had come since that morning at Fort Benning, when her fellow trainees had laughed at her during qualification. She had not only proven herself capable of performing at the highest levels of military service, but had also helped change perceptions about what women could accomplish in combat roles. The intelligence Sarah and Davis had gathered proved even more valuable than initially expected. Within 48 hours of their return, coalition forces launched a series of coordinated strikes against insurgent positions throughout the region. The Wolves Network, which had operated with impunity for months, suddenly found itself under intense pressure from multiple directions. However, the success of these operations also brought unwanted attention to FOB Granite. The Wolf had survived the initial strikes and was now actively seeking revenge against the coalition forces responsible for disrupting his organization. Intelligence reports indicated that he was planning a major assault against the base itself, using information gathered from captured coalition personnel and local informants. Sarah was cleaning her rifle in the team's preparation area when Staff Sergeant Chen approached with a grim expression. The usually confident team leader looked genuinely concerned, which immediately put Sarah on alert. Chen was not the type of soldier who worried unnecessarily, so his demeanor suggested that something serious was developing. "Martinez, Davis, I need to brief you on the current situation," Chen said, gesturing for them to follow him to the secure briefing room. "The intelligence you gathered has stirred up a hornet's nest, and now that nest is coming after us." Inside the briefing room, Captain Foster and the base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, were studying a large map of the surrounding area. Red markers indicated known enemy positions, while blue markers showed coalition forces and defensive positions. The concentration of red markers around FOB granite was significantly higher than Sarah had ever seen before. "The situation is this," Lieutenant Colonel Harrison began without preamble. "The Wolf is organizing a coordinated assault against our position, scheduled to begin sometime in the next 24 to 48 hours. Intelligence suggests he's assembled over 200 fighters, including some foreign operatives with advanced training and equipment." Captain Foster pointed to several locations on the map. "They'll likely attack from multiple directions simultaneously, using mortar and rocket fire to suppress our defensive positions while assault teams attempt to breach the perimeter. Our biggest advantage is that we know it's coming, which gives us time to prepare." Chen looked directly at Sarah and Davis. "Your mission will be to establish advanced positions outside the base perimeter before the attack begins. You'll provide early warning of enemy movements and engage high-value targets to disrupt their coordination. This is going to be the most dangerous mission any of us have faced." Sarah studied the map carefully, identifying potential positions that would provide good fields of fire, while offering escape routes if their locations were compromised. The terrain around FOB granite was challenging, with numerous ravines and rocky outcroppings that could conceal enemy movements, but also provided opportunities for defensive positions. "How much support can we expect?" Davis asked, examining the same areas Sarah was studying. "Minimal," Lieutenant Colonel Harrison replied honestly. "We'll have air support on standby, but the enemy will likely use surface-to-air missiles to limit our aerial assets. Artillery support will be available, but you'll be operating close enough to enemy positions that calling in fire missions will be extremely dangerous." The briefing continued for another hour, covering communication protocols, emergency procedures, and extraction plans. When it concluded, Sarah and Davis had less than 6 hours to prepare their equipment and move into position before enemy forces were expected to begin their final approach to the base. They departed FOB granite just after midnight, carrying enough ammunition and supplies for potentially several days of sustained combat. The weight of their equipment made movement slow and difficult, but both soldiers understood that they would need every round and piece of gear they were carrying. Their destination was a rocky outcropping approximately 1 kilometer southeast of the base, positioned to overlook the most likely approach routes for enemy assault teams. The position would put them behind enemy lines once the attack began, but it also provided the best observation and fields of fire for disrupting the assault. The movement to their position took nearly 3 hours, as they had to avoid several enemy reconnaissance teams that were already in the area. Sarah was impressed by the level of organization and discipline displayed by the insurgent forces. These were not the poorly trained and equipped fighters they had encountered in previous engagements. Once in position, Sarah and Davis established their hide site with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that had become their trademark. Every piece of equipment was carefully positioned to provide maximum effectiveness while maintaining concealment. Their communication equipment was tested and backup systems activated. As dawn broke over the mountains, Sarah could see enemy forces moving into position throughout the valley below. Through her scope, she counted over 50 fighters establishing positions within her field of view, and Davis reported similar numbers in other sectors. The scale of the impending attack was larger than any previous assault against coalition forces in the region. "Command, this is Overwatch 7, Davis reported quietly. "We have visual confirmation of large-scale enemy movement. Count approximately 150 to 200 fighters taking positions for coordinated assault." The response from the base was immediate. "Overwatch 7, you are authorized to engage targets of opportunity. Disrupt their coordination and eliminate high-value targets as identified." Sarah began systematically engaging enemy personnel who appeared to be in leadership roles or operating advanced equipment. Her first target was a man directing the placement of what appeared to be a mortar team. The shot was successful, immediately causing confusion among the mortar crew and disrupting their setup. Her second target was an individual operating sophisticated communication equipment, likely coordinating between different assault groups. This engagement was more challenging, as the target was partially concealed behind a rock formation, but Sarah's patience and skill paid off with another successful hit. The enemy response was swift and intense. As soon as they realized they were being engaged by a sniper, several teams began attempting to locate Sarah and Davis's position. Automatic weapons fire began impacting the rocks around their hide site, forcing them to remain in concealment while continuing to engage targets. Davis, we've got multiple teams moving to flank our position, Sarah observed through her scope. At least 20 fighters approaching from the east, and another group of 15 coming from the south. Davis immediately began calling for artillery support, while Sarah continued engaging targets. The coordination between the two soldiers was flawless, with Davis providing target information and range corrections while Sarah focused on making accurate shots under increasingly difficult conditions. The artillery barrage arrived within minutes, impacting the flanking teams and buying Sarah and Davis time to reposition. However, the enemy assault on Fob Granite was now beginning in earnest, with mortar rounds and rocket-propelled grenades impacting the base's defensive positions. Through her scope, Sarah could see enemy assault teams moving toward the base's perimeter, using smoke and suppressive fire to mask their advance. The defenders were responding with everything they had, but the attackers had achieved tactical surprise in terms of their numbers and coordination. Command, this is Overwatch 7, Davis reported urgently. We have approximately 50 enemy fighters approaching the north wall of the base. They're using smoke to conceal their advance, but I can provide coordinates for artillery interdiction. Sarah began engaging the assault teams, focusing on targets carrying heavy weapons or directing other fighters. Each successful shot disrupted the enemy advance and bought precious time for the base's defenders to prepare for the assault. However, she was also aware that their position was becoming increasingly precarious as more enemy forces attempted to locate and neutralize their position. The battle for Fob Granite intensified as morning progressed into afternoon. Sarah had been in continuous combat for over 8 hours, engaging target after target while enemy forces attempted to overrun the base's defenses. Her ammunition was running dangerously low, and the constant stress of precision shooting under extreme conditions was beginning to take its toll. Through her scope, Sarah watched as enemy assault teams reached the base's outer perimeter. Explosions erupted along the defensive walls as insurgents used improvised explosive devices and rocket-propelled grenades to create breaches. The sound of automatic weapons fire was now constant, punctuated by the deeper rumble of mortar rounds and the sharp crack of sniper rifles. Davis, we need to relocate, Sarah said urgently. They've got our position triangulated and there's a squad moving up the ravine to our east. Davis quickly gathered their essential equipment while Sarah provided covering fire against the approaching enemy team. Moving under fire required perfect coordination, with Davis identifying covered routes while Sarah engaged any enemy personnel who might threaten their movement. Their new position was less ideal in terms of fields of fire, but it provided better concealment and multiple escape routes. The rocky terrain that made movement difficult also provided excellent protection against enemy fire, allowing them to continue their mission despite the deteriorating tactical situation. From their new position, Sarah could see that the battle was reaching a critical point. Enemy forces had breached the base's perimeter in 2 locations, and fierce close-quarters combat was taking place within the defensive positions. Coalition forces were fighting desperately to prevent the base from being overrun, but the attackers had achieved significant tactical advantages through their superior numbers and coordination. Command, this is Overwatch 7, Davis reported with controlled urgency. We have enemy forces inside the perimeter at sectors 4 and 7. Recommend immediate reinforcement of those positions. The response from the base was fragmented, interrupted by explosions and the sounds of close combat. Overwatch 7, we're taking heavy casualties. Continue engaging targets of opportunity. Air support is en route but delayed due to enemy surface-to-air missiles. Sarah resumed engaging targets, focusing on enemy personnel who appeared to be directing the assault or operating heavy weapons. Her shots were having a measurable impact on the enemy's coordination, but the sheer number of attackers made it impossible to stop their advance entirely. Through her scope, she identified a figure she recognized from the intelligence photographs taken during their surveillance mission. One of the Wolf's lieutenants was directing an assault team near the base's communications center, clearly attempting to capture or destroy the facility that coordinated coalition operations throughout the region. The shot was challenging, requiring Sarah to engage a target at over 900 meters while compensating for significant wind conditions and the stress of continuous combat. She controlled her breathing, made the necessary adjustments to her scope, and fired. The shot was successful, eliminating a key enemy leader and causing temporary confusion among his subordinates. "Excellent shot," Davis observed. That was one of their primary coordinators. The assault team is falling back from the communications center. However, their success also drew increased attention from enemy forces. Sarah could see multiple teams now actively searching for their position, using the sound of her rifle shots to narrow down their location. Automatic weapons fire began impacting the rocks around their position with increasing accuracy. "We've got company," Davis warned, pointing toward a group of insurgents approaching from their left flank. "At least 12 fighters, and they know approximately where we are." Sarah quickly shifted her position to engage the flanking force while Davis called for artillery support. The approaching enemy team was moving with tactical discipline, using cover and concealment effectively, while advancing toward their position. These were clearly experienced fighters who understood how to locate and assault sniper positions. Her first shot dropped the lead insurgent, causing the others to take cover and slowing their advance. However, they continued moving forward, using fire and movement tactics, with some fighters providing suppressive fire while others advanced to new positions. The artillery barrage arrived just as the enemy team was preparing to assault Sarah and Davis's position. The high explosive rounds impacted directly among the advancing insurgents, eliminating the immediate threat, but also revealing the exact location of the coalition sniper team to other enemy forces in the area. "Davis, we need to move now," Sarah said urgently. "Every enemy fighter in the valley knows exactly where we are." They began moving toward their predetermined extraction point, but the route was now compromised by enemy forces converging on their position from multiple directions. The rocky terrain that had provided protection now became an obstacle course that slowed their movement, while enemy fighters closed in from all sides. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of using her sniper rifle for close-quarters combat, as enemy personnel appeared at ranges of less than 100 meters. Her training had prepared her for this possibility, but the transition from precision long-range shooting to rapid engagement of multiple close targets required a complete shift in tactics and mindset. A group of 3 insurgents appeared around a rocky outcropping directly ahead of their planned route. Sarah engaged them rapidly, using her rifle's semi-automatic capability to fire multiple quick shots. All 3 targets were neutralized, but the engagement revealed their position to other nearby enemy forces. "Command, this is Overwatch 7, Davis called desperately. "We are surrounded and taking fire from multiple directions. Request immediate extraction support." The response was not encouraging. "Overwatch 7, all available aircraft are engaged in close air support for the base defense. Extraction will be delayed until air superiority is established." Sarah and Davis found themselves trapped in a defensive position with limited ammunition and no immediate prospect of rescue. Enemy forces were closing in from all directions, and their only advantages were superior training, better equipment, and intimate knowledge of the local terrain. "Davis, we're going to have to fight our way out," Sarah said, checking her remaining ammunition. "I've got maybe 20 rounds left for the rifle, plus what's in my sidearm." Davis nodded grimly. "I've got about the same, plus 2 grenades. If we're going to move, it has to be now before they get completely organized." They began moving toward the steepest and most difficult terrain in the area, hoping that their superior physical conditioning and familiarity with the ground would give them an advantage over their pursuers. The route would take them away from FOB granite initially, but it was their only chance of avoiding capture or elimination. As they moved through the rocky maze, Sarah could hear enemy forces calling to each other in multiple languages, coordinating their search and gradually tightening the circle around the fleeing coalition soldiers. The sounds of battle from FOB granite continued in the distance, indicating that the base's defenders were still holding their positions despite the intense pressure. Sarah had never imagined that her military service would lead to a situation like this, where survival depended on every skill she had learned and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. The training range at Fort Benning, where her fellow soldiers had laughed at her abilities, seemed like a different world compared to the harsh reality of combat in the mountains of Afghanistan. The escape through the rugged Afghan mountains became a deadly game of cat and mouse that lasted for 18 hours. Sarah and Davis moved through terrain so harsh that their pursuers gradually gave up the chase. choosing instead to return to the main battle at FOB Granite. The two soldiers found themselves alone in hostile territory, with minimal supplies and no communication with friendly forces. As the sun rose on the second day of the battle, Sarah and Davis reached a high ridge that provided a clear view of the valley containing FOB Granite. What they saw filled them with both relief and concern. The base was still flying the American flag, indicating that the defenders had successfully repelled the assault. But smoke was rising from several buildings and the defensive perimeter showed clear signs of damage. "Davis, look at Sector 7, Sarah said, pointing toward the base. "There's still fighting going on near the motor pool." Through their binoculars, they could see muzzle flashes and movement that indicated ongoing combat. The main assault had been repelled, but enemy forces were still present in the area, conducting what appeared to be a fighting withdrawal while attempting to inflict maximum damage on coalition assets. "We need to get back and help," Davis said, checking their remaining ammunition and supplies. "The base is still under attack and every rifle counts." Sarah studied the terrain between their position and the base, identifying potential routes that would allow them to approach without being detected by the remaining enemy forces. The direct route was clearly compromised, as insurgent teams were still operating in the valley, but a longer approach through the northern ridgeline might allow them to reach friendly positions. They began the long journey back to FOB Granite, moving carefully through terrain that had been the site of intense combat just hours earlier. Evidence of the battle was everywhere: destroyed equipment, abandoned weapons, and the unmistakable signs that many people had died in this remote valley. After 6 hours of careful movement, Sarah and Davis reached a position overlooking the base's northern perimeter. They could see that the defensive positions were heavily damaged but still manned by coalition forces. More importantly, they could identify several enemy positions that were continuing to harass the base with sniper fire and occasional mortar rounds. "Command, this is Overwatch 7, Davis transmitted on their emergency frequency. "We are approaching from the north and have visual on remaining enemy positions. Request permission to engage." The response came immediately, filled with relief and excitement. "Overwatch 7, you are cleared to engage all hostile targets. We thought you were dead. Outstanding work on surviving behind enemy lines." Sarah set up her rifle and began systematically engaging the enemy positions that were still threatening the base. Her first target was a sniper who had been harassing coalition forces from a position approximately 600 meters from the perimeter. The insurgent had chosen his location well, with excellent concealment and fields of fire, but he had not anticipated being engaged from his flank. The shot was successful, eliminating a threat that had been pinning down an entire section of the base's defenders. Sarah immediately shifted to her next target, a mortar team that had been dropping rounds onto the base's helicopter landing zone. These engagements required her to use all the skills she had developed over months of combat operations. With each successful shot, the pressure on FOB Granite's defenders decreased measurably. Enemy forces that had been maintaining aggressive positions began withdrawing when they realized they were being engaged by an undetected coalition sniper team. The psychological impact of Sarah's interventions was as important as the physical elimination of specific threats. "Martinez, you're clearing the entire northern sector," came a voice over the radio that Sarah recognized as Staff Sergeant Chen. "The base commander wants to personally thank you and Davis for your actions over the past 2 days." As the afternoon progressed, the remaining enemy forces completed their withdrawal from the immediate area around FOB Granite. The assault that had threatened to overrun the base had been decisively defeated, though at significant cost to both sides. Coalition casualties were heavy, but the base remained operational and capable of continuing its mission. Sarah and Davis were finally able to return to the base as the sun set over the mountains. They were greeted by soldiers who looked at them with a mixture of amazement and respect. The story of their survival behind enemy lines and their role in the base's defense had already spread throughout the garrison. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison personally met them at the perimeter gate. "Martinez, Davis, what you accomplished over the past 2 days represents some of the finest soldiering I've witnessed in 25 years of military service. Your actions directly contributed to saving this base and the lives of everyone in it." The debriefing that followed revealed the full scope of what Sarah and Davis had accomplished. Their initial intelligence gathering had enabled coalition forces to disrupt the Wolf's network significantly. During the battle itself, Sarah had eliminated over 30 enemy personnel, including several key leaders whose deaths had disrupted the coordinated assault at critical moments. More importantly, their survival and continued operations behind enemy lines had prevented the base from being completely cut off from outside support. The intelligence they provided about enemy movements and positions had been crucial in coordinating artillery, strikes, and air support that ultimately broke the back of the assault. Jake Thompson approached Sarah as she was cleaning her equipment after the debriefing. The soldier who had once questioned her presence in the sniper program now looked genuinely humbled by what he had witnessed. "Martinez, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "Actually, I owe you more than that. What you did over the past 2 days saved my life and the lives of everyone on this base. I was wrong about everything, and I'm sorry." Sarah looked at him for a moment before responding. "Thompson, we're all here to do a job and protect each other. That's what matters." The battle for FOB Granite became a legendary engagement within coalition forces operating in Afghanistan. Sarah's role in the defense was documented in official reports that made their way to the highest levels of military command. Her actions demonstrated that individual skill, courage, and determination could have strategic impacts even in large-scale combat operations. Weeks later, Sarah received word that she was being awarded the Silver Star for her actions during the battle. The citation specifically mentioned her role in providing critical intelligence, her precision shooting under extreme conditions, and her survival and continued operations behind enemy lines during the most critical phase of the engagement. The ceremony took place at FOB Granite, with soldiers from across the region attending to witness the presentation. As Lieutenant Colonel Harrison pinned the medal to Sarah's uniform, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the laughter and skepticism on the training range to becoming one of the most decorated soldiers in her unit, she had proven that dedication, skill, and courage were the only qualifications that truly mattered. Standing before her fellow soldiers, Sarah realized that she had not just earned their respect through her actions in combat. She had helped change fundamental assumptions about what women could accomplish in the most demanding military roles. The young recruits who would follow in her footsteps would face fewer barriers and less skepticism because of what she had proven on the battlefields of Afghanistan. The war would continue, and there would be other battles and other challenges. But Sarah Martinez had already accomplished something remarkable. She had transformed from the target of ridicule into a symbol of excellence, proving that true warriors are defined by their actions rather than others' expectations.